Basic wheel throwing demo. So first, the parts of the wheel. This part here is the wheel head. It has these two knobs that stick up. The knobs are to attach the bat. The bat has these little holes that slip over the knobs to secure it on the wheel head. Around your wheel head is your splash guard. It takes care of a lot of the splashes, but not all of them, so I do suggest wearing an apron or two. In front of it is your table. This is where you can store tools. It also puts your bowl of water. Your bowl of water should be about halfway full, with warm water is better just because it is less pleasant than cold, slimy water. For turning on the wheel, there are two switches on the side. One is the power switch. There's a little green light over it. The light should turn on when you turn the wheel on. Next to it is the directional switch. The directional switch chooses which way the wheel head rotates. If the switch is in the middle, the wheel will not move because you have not picked a direction. On the floor next to that should be your foot pedal for your wheel. It controls how fast the wheel spins. Tools. You will need a sponge. You will want probably a large loop tool, a small loop tool, a pin tool, a rib. I would suggest a flexible one. That's my personal preference. And again, the bowl about half full of water. You will also need a chunk of clay that you have wedged into a soup can-like shape. About soup can size should be sufficient for a bowl. You're first going to set the clay down to make a little mark for yourself to aim for right in the middle of the bat. You are then, to get the clay attached, going to slam it firmly down onto that center mark. And if it's not quite centered, mine's a little off to one side, you can pick it back up, pat it back into shape, and then try again. Getting a little bit off center. So keep doing it until you're satisfied with where it is, because you don't want to fight clay that's not centered. There we go. So I'm going to then wiggle it back and forth once I'm happy with it being pretty close to center, and I'm going to push the sides down into the bat to help it securely stay on the bat. I'm then going to kind of pat my sides in to get my clay back to as close to center as possible. All right, so direction for your wheel head. When you're first learning how to throw, you want the wheel to spin towards your least dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so least dominant is left. I would want my wheel head to spin towards the palm of my left hand, not the fingers of my left hand, because when you're learning how to throw, you tend to have less control. Your fingers tend to get caught. It probably will hurt your fingers, and it will almost definitely ruin your project. I actually now throw with it spinning towards my fingers because I have control, but I wouldn't suggest starting that way. Once you have your direction picked, you're going to slowly compress the pedal until your wheel starts to spin. This is probably a little too slow. This is definitely too fast. So you want to find somewhere in the middle where it's spinning fairly quickly, but not ridiculously fast. So somewhere around here is probably pretty good. I'm going to use my sponge to pick up a bit of water to get my clay wet. I'm then going to brace my arms against my body. I'm going to have my elbows either pushed into my hips or into the side of my leg, not the top of my leg, the side of my leg. The reason I'm doing this is because the clay has a lot of force and it's going to push my arms around unless they're braced well against my body. I'm going to get my clay wet again, and I'm going to go ahead and push in on the sides of my clay, bringing it a little bit more tall. I'm going to get wet again, and next I'm going to push down with my top hand, my dominant hand, and I'm going to angle my dominant hand towards my side hand to guide the clay in that direction, and then my side hand is going to guide that clay downwards to help it center. So once you've got it fairly far down, it goes into a position that I call birthday cake. That's not a technical term, it just makes me think of a birthday cake. And then you are going to get your clay wet again, and once again, arms braced against the side of your body or your legs. You're going to push back upwards. And you're going to repeat this process until your clay is centered. Up and down, up and down. The way to check for center is to get your clay nice and wet when it's down in birthday cake. I'm going to push it just a little bit further down. You're going to get it wet so your hands don't stick. Now if your hands are moving, my hands definitely are, it means you're not in center. So you need to continue to go back up and down until you have encouraged the clay to be so centered that your hands no longer move when resting on the very wet surface. I'm getting closer, but my hands are still moving a little bit. If they're only moving a little, you may be able to adjust while it's just down in birthday cake. I'm going to try that first. If I can't get it to behave that way, I'll go back up again. Still a little bit off, I'm going to go back up. And then back down. My side hand is always, always, always braced against my hip or my leg so that I have lots of control for pushing the clay. I'm getting very, very close. If you're super close to center, you can always use a loop tool to just trim a little of that unevenness off. And just play and fiddle with it until it's centered. You don't want to settle for off center. It won't work well for you. So once you're centered, your hands are pretty much no longer moving. You're going to rest your hands on the outside of your clay and put your thumbs right in the middle, and you're going to sit there for a minute and be sure that your thumbs are in the middle, because what we're going to do is we're going to open a hole, and we don't want that hole to be anywhere but center. So once you're confident that you're in the middle with your thumbs, you're going to push down to create a little bit of a dip, and then you're going to fill that little dip with a little bit of water so that your thumbs can move easily through the clay. And you're going to continue to push down into your clay. If you pick up a little bit of clay with your thumbnail, that's fine. You're going to push down into the clay until you're close to the bottom. Not all the way to the bottom. You don't want to go all the way through, but you want about a ½ inch to a ¼ of an inch of clay left on the bottom before you hit the back. Once you've got the hole down in there, you're going to put your fingertips of your dominant hand on the inside and your least dominant hand on the outside supporting. I'm just going to pull with my fingertips to open that hole a little bit wider and make the walls go straight down. I'm going to even out my top here a little bit. Once your hole is open and even, you're going to start to pull up your sides to create your walls. You always want to establish your height first, even if you're making a bowl, because the more open a clay piece gets earlier on, the harder it is to control as you work. So for opening or bringing up walls, you want to switch to having less dominant hand on the inside, dominant hand on the outside. And you're compressing the clay with your fingers and guiding that compressed clay upwards to make walls thinner and taller. The hand position is not generally specific. There's no rule to it. As long as it works for you, it's fine. What works for me is a few fingertips on the inside, and then on the outside, my first finger and my ring finger are compressing my middle finger behind it, so there's a trough that I'm guiding the clay into, and then I'm able to guide that clay upwards. So I'm going to go ahead and start compressing the clay. You can see where it's being pushed towards my middle finger. As I guide the clay upwards, I'm locking my thumbs together to give myself a little bit extra control and support. And as I pull, I want to go slowly and evenly so I distribute my clay nice and even. When I get to the top, I want to release nice and slow so that everything's distributed as evenly as possible. Once I've done my first pull, I'm going to continue to pull from the base on the inside and base on the outside, which are different heights. I'm going to continue to pull that clay upwards to make my walls taller and more thin. And once again, once I get to the top, release slowly so that things are distributing evenly, because the more uneven your top gets, the more you have to fight the clay. As I'm starting to pull up, I tend to pull out a little bit. We don't want the clay opening too wide, so if you get your hands nice and wet, you can gently push in on the clay to bring it back more towards the middle. I'm going to continue to pull up my walls. Again, always starting at the base on the outside and the inside to get as much of that clay up to my top. Slow release. So, at this point, I want to do a couple things. I want to make sure my top is really nice and even. So I'm going to push my clay back in towards the middle, slowly and gently. If I have any unevenness, and I do have a little bit, I want to take my pin tool, brace my other hand, my pin tool hand with my other hand, and I want to slowly push my pin tool into the clay below where it's uneven, whether it's uneven in height or uneven in thickness. I'm going to slowly push it in until it cuts through, and then I'm going to remove that uneven chunk. Then I can use my sponge to clean off any little rough parts. Suck out some extra moisture here. I'm getting a lot of water in the bottom. So, once my top is even, I may want to do one final pull. So what I'm going to do as I'm doing this final pull, I'm going to go nice and slow, and I'm feeling for any unevenness. If the wall's a little bit too thin, I'm going to release pressure to leave some of that clay I'm moving in that spot, make it a little bit thicker. If it's really thick in a spot, I'm going to increase my pressure to push that clay elsewhere. Once I've done all my pulls, and the way I know this is my clay feels even from top to bottom, and my wall is a good thickness, so this is a pretty good thickness. A little bit thicker than 1/4 inch up to about 1/2 inch is a good thickness to get to. I'm then going to do a couple things. I'm going to get rid of some of my extra clay down at the bottom. I don't want a big heavy base on my bowl, so I want to get rid of some of that extra thickness. Again, I'm bracing my tool hand with my other hand for extra stability. And then I'm going to slide it slowly up the side just to make sure there's not any uneven tool marks. And back down. So now that I've removed extra clay from the bottom, I want to get my clay wet on the outside and the inside. And I want to, again, support my clay with my less dominant hand again. And I want my dominant hand to go inside fingertips all the way to the bottom of the inside. And I'm going to slowly rotate my hand outward to start opening up my bowl. Really be slow and confident and strong and stable with this so that your bowl stays fairly even to the end. I'm going to add a little bit more moisture to my outside, suck a little extra out from the inside. And then I'm going to continue again to start opening out my bowl a little bit farther. At this point, I might slow my wheel down just a little bit so I have a little bit more control. I want to start looking at my outside shape, seeing how I like it. It's getting pretty close to what I want. So I'm going to, once again, get things just a little bit wet. And then I'm going to bring my rip tool in. I'm going to use the curved side on the inside to do a little bit of smoothing and curve shaping to my bowl on the inside. I'm going to use it on the outside to clean up unevenness, and I'm going to use the flat side for that. Just slowly, carefully scrape along the edges of my bowl on the outside until I'm happy with the shape of my bowl. Now, if your bowl is starting to get really flimsy and floppy, you may want to just suck the extra water out now and either blow dry it for a little bit while it's spinning slowly, or if you don't have time, wrap it up for the day loosely with a bag and come back and finish it the next day. So once the clay gets really soft, it's very hard to control and very, very easy to break. So don't push your luck. Just come back the next day and finish shaping then. It doesn't need to all happen in one day. So if you're pretty happy with your shape, you want to go ahead and get rid of the extra water. I'm going to start a slow spin again. I'm just going to go along the outside with my sponge and suck up the water there. I'm going to go on the inside very carefully and suck up the water on the inside. So you don't want it soaking up extra water and collapsing when we're not looking. And then I'm just going to carefully roll my sponge across the lip of the bowl and curve down to round out the lip of the bowl so it's not sharp anywhere. Might take a couple passes, that's fine. Once you've got all the extra water up and you've rounded out your bowl, you are done for the day. You want to wrap it loosely with a bag so it can start to dry out and harden up a little bit, so that hopefully by the next day it's pretty close to leather hard for trimming. Really quickly, cleaning. You don't want to pull your bowl off the bat, you want to pull the bat off the wheel head. That's the purpose of the bat, being able to move your projects without touching them. So you're going to take the bat off the wheel head and set it aside. And then you need to clean the wheel head itself with your sponge. Get it nice and clean. You may need to rinse out your bowl first. You also need to clean the splash guard. The splash guard has a big piece and a smaller, shorter piece. In order to take it apart, first you want to turn off your wheel so it doesn't spin suddenly. And then you want to lift up on one of the bigger pieces on the side and then carefully pull out the smaller end. You may want to move your water out of the way so you don't knock that on the floor. So you're going to pick up the bigger end, pull out the smaller end, and then do that same procedure on the other side until the small piece comes loose. There's probably a lot of water in there, so you want to be really careful not to spill it all over the place. You can pour it directly into your bowl. And then take it to the sink and wipe it out with a sponge in the sink. You don't need to have running water the whole time. Just wipe it out with a sponge and then rinse it off. So you're going to take off both pieces. The bigger piece wiggles back and forth to come loose. You're going to take both pieces off, clean them off thoroughly, clean off the table, the wheel head, everything sparkly clean. Then you're going to start with the big piece again. You're going to angle it downwards and push and wiggle it into place, and then the other piece will pop into place and your wheel will be all clean. The end.